On today's show, we are diving into the game of one of the toolsiest power forwards eligible in this upcoming NHL draft, Václav Nestrašil.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I am your host, Sebastian High, the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects. And on today's show, we're focusing on a player that I've been watching all season long, and I've been talking about a lot on this podcast. So if you are a regular listener, this is a name that you are already very familiar with, and that is Václav Nestrašil of the Muskegon Lumberjacks in the USHL. In my neck of the woods of the area that I scout here for Elite Prospects, we'll be digging into what makes him so special in terms of the puck skills and the physicality, as well as the mental aspect of the game, where he's still quite raw and there's still a lot of runway, but where he still has to do quite a lot of ironing out in order to become an NHL player. And finally, we're going to look ahead and see where he might land on draft day, what his range might be, and what players in the league actually play a game quite similar to his. All that and a lot more coming up here on today's show. But first, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit fanduel.com/lockedon to get started. So, Václav Nestrašil is a really, really fun player that I have adored watching here all season long, and we have him ranked at 26th overall at Elite Prospects. The only other public outlet that has him ranked inside the first round as of the time of recording right now is Dobber Prospects, who have him at 30th, but beyond that, he's mainly a second round ranked player. Central Scouting has him at 36th overall. Bob McKenzie has him at 60. McKean's at 50th. So he's very much kind of like 25 to 55 range guy at the moment. But I think that this is a player who's going to see a significant rise in his stock in like the end of season rankings, because his play down the stretch for Muskegon has been fantastic. And I mean, he just scored a goal and an assist in the first 2 games against Dubuque in that playoff series. And the Dubuque Fighting States are a very, very strong team, but I mean, Muskegon has just been on absolute fire here as of right now, and I'm recording this on April 27th. So in the middle of their playoff round there, in the Final Four, in the semifinal there, and if they win the next game, they are off to the final for the Clark Cup Championship. So lots to look forward to still at the end of the season with Nestrašil, but he's been playing a very big role down the stretch for Muskegon with 3 goals and 7 points in his last 10 games, but getting involved in a variety of ways that aren't just seen on the score sheet. He's a 6'5", 190-pound right shot right winger with a whole bunch of skill and a lot of violence. At 6'5", 190, you can kind of see that this is a player with a lot of size. He's a big guy, but he still has a lot of filling out to do in his frame. There's still a slightly lanky player. He's going to be a lot stronger, a lot thicker by the time he reaches the NHL. And I mean, more so by the time he's 25, 26 years old. But this is a guy that I could envision playing in the NHL at 220 plus pounds. I think that he's a really, really big customer and still has a lot of growth still to do in terms of adding muscle to his frame, which he will do a lot of once he makes the jump to the University of Massachusetts next season. It was just announced last week, broken by my colleague at Elite Prospects, Hansa Zufal, that Nestrašil is going over to UMass a year earlier than planned initially. He'd initially been committed for the 2026-27 season, but now he's going over in the fall. And I think that's a very good landing spot for this player and a good jump in competition to challenge him with where he's at the moment in his development, because this is a guy who physically does not really fit in the USHL. He's really big. He's really skilled. There's a lot of middle-driven pace in his game, and the small details, but also the overall flashes of skill are very impressive. So let's just dive into that skill element, to the puck skills, to the tools in themselves, as we're breaking those down here in the first segment. And kicking it off with the physicality. It's the thing that jumps off the page. And I think that Nestrašil's physicality is really determined by a level of engagement, intensity, and violence. This is a guy that, sure, has a lot of that physical strength like we just see on his profile and on the raw numbers on the stat sheet. But in terms of how he plays the game of hockey, constantly moving his feet, pressuring opponents, trying to get underneath them with little stick lifts in the neutral zone. He's a real pest. He's difficult to play against. He's annoying to play against. And that's something I think should become a piece of his identity moving forward into college hockey and the National Hockey League. Beyond that, this is a player that has a lot of this physicality in his game that's just really driven by a high motor, a desire to get involved. He's not a player that takes any really shifts off. Sometimes he tries to do things and it doesn't work out, and he doesn't always make good reads. And at times he can hit a little bit, but more often than not, this is a player who's really trying to play an effective physical game, and using his frame is very effective. He's a really violent player, and the physicality is a 7 grade in my book, according to our Elite Prospects grading scale, which goes from a 1 to a 9 being like Connor McDavid level skating ability, like top of the line elite. So a 7 grade in physicality is a really, really high grade. It corresponds to him projecting as being either the most or the second most physical forward on the lineup that he ends up landing on if he hits his upside. The handling skill, however, is also really, really fun. It's less polished than the physicality is, and the decision-making behind it and the ideas behind it, I think, still could use a little bit of tinkering in the coming years, and this is where his like rawness as a prospect comes into play a little bit. But the skill, the puck touches, the unlocked top hand, the creativity to try things, he's constantly solving problems and attacking opposition head on, using his handling skill to get around them. And he's quite opportunistic as well to use his surroundings to his advantage, whether it's to pop the puck off the back of the net to go and retrieve it behind to get around a single defender, or to use the boards proactively. This is a guy who uses his environment really, really intelligently, and that elevates the handling skill because in a sense, he's a player that I think uses everything that's at his disposal in a way that not many players at the USHL level do. It doesn't happen all the time, but in these flashes, it's very, very impressive. So the handling skill, the dynamism, the creativity to try things and to just break opponents' ankles, these things have been seen this season with Nestrašil. And I think that the passing ability really lends itself nicely in terms of complementing those handling abilities, because the creativity, the accuracy, the precision on his passes is one of the better ones in my region of this year's class. And Nestrašil has been my top ranked player in my region for over a month and a half now. It's been quite a while that he's been at that peak among USHL draft eligibles, and that includes names like Ivan Ryabkin and Will Moore and Jack Murtagh and all the NTDP players. Nestrašil to me projects as the most interesting NHL talent at this stage, and a lot of that flows through that physicality, handling, and passing combination, because they can complement each other just so wonderfully in these high-end sequences. The shot, I think, is also quite good. I think it's above average. I think he could grow it to a 6 or 6.5 grade in time. At the moment, I'm giving him a 5.5, whereas the passing and the handling both get a 6.5. He's going to be able to get a lot more power behind his release as he gains more weight and is able to just flex his stick more against the ice. So in time, it is a tool that could improve in terms of the heaviness of the release, but also the decision-making behind when he shoots. But overall, I think he's still a player that has been a goal-scoring threat this season in the U.S. Hockey League, but still is a bit more unpolished in that area of the game to be a really projectable, consistent, high-end goal scorer. Finally, to wrap up this first segment, we have the skating ability. And this is a big man with very, very fluid edges and a lot of agility. But the stride mechanics are still very wonky. At times on the ice, he looks like an agile albatross. There's some wonkiness. He's still getting used to his height and his size on his feet on skates. But overall, I think that agility is going to lend itself very, very well in order to beat one-on-one opponents and to really create those incisive offensive drives, getting to the middle of the ice, attacking with speed, and being confident to try different elements and try different things with a puck on a stick in those tight quarter situations. And that mobility ability should in time lend itself well to him solving those problems as they arise, but he's going to need quite a bit of fine-tuning on that front. He's far from the most polished skater in this year's class, but in time he could grow significantly. So a 5 grade, I think, kind of straddles like those two sides of that coin in terms of the wonkiness that still has to get sorted out and before he can make it to the NHL as a like average level skater. But if he's able to do that, he could certainly rise higher in that projection. But that wraps up this first segment. In the next one, we're going to look at the mental side of the game with his habits, his toolkit, and a whole lot more. But first, a quick message from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. I love how FanDuel makes betting so easy, whether it's picking my favorite team or diving into player props. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many ways to bet on your favorite players and on any inkling that you have going into a game. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. Don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. All right, let's keep the episode rolling here in the second segment. And first and foremost, let's actually broach how this guy has produced this season, because I completely forgot to mention that in the introduction. So this season with the Muskegon Lumberjacks in the USHL, Nestrašil has 19 goals and 42 points in 61 games. He didn't have the most points earlier on in the season. The first couple of months saw him score maybe like 10 points in the first 25 games. And ever since that, he's been a lot closer and even above a point a game pace. So it's been a bit of a tale of two seasons of him getting acclimatized to the USHL pace, to North American ice, since he only played 11 games with Muskegon last year after switching over from the Czech U17 league. So he's a guy that I think is still very much coming into his own, and a player who could really, really see his production skyrocket in college, even amongst his peers and his age group. This is a player with a lot of potential in terms of his runway just going skyward. He's a player who's been adding elements to his game and looking more and more confident and composed with the puck on his stick week by week here this season. And that trajectory is something that I personally, as a scout, with my experience over the last couple of years, I'm very, very excited to take a hard swing on that profile. It's something that in past years has very, very consistently seen better and better performances through the seasons. And while he is still quite raw in quite a few aspects of his habits, his decision-making, the overall upside and the player he could turn into in an NHL top 6 or a middle 6 is just so salivating, especially in a draft class like this year's, where there's a pretty clear drop-off in talent around the 25th overall range. I think Nestrašil is a player who's quite clearly above that cutoff now by the end of the season rather than below it. Sure, he's not a sure thing, but you're never getting a sure thing when you're drafting that late, unless it's a player in the first round in the later half who's like a surefire like bottom 6 or 4th line or third pairing guy. And you see some players like that get drafted, and there's value in that. But Nestrašil, I think, has a combination of significant upside and also a relatively high floor, because players with his level of tools and that kind of trajectory in their draft year seasons rarely miss in what I've seen in the past couple of years. In terms of what is raw in his game, I think a lot of it is kind of the smaller details in terms of awareness, and especially at speed. This is a guy that, with the puck on his stick or off his stick, can often run into teammates when he's charging through the neutral zone. He's just trying to weasel his way out of a situation, mainly concerned about where his opponents are, but his positioning relative to his teammates is still, well, I don't think that it's relative to his teammates is considered all that often in his rushes. It's still a real work in progress. And what I've seen this season, where he's regularly, as an off-puck rusher, just crowding the puck side. There's no stretching of the ice whatsoever. And in the end, there have been multiple times that Muskegon is trying to get an entry with 3 players on 1/3 of the width of the ice, where there's no stretching whatsoever. Very easy for defenders to contain and to just shut things down when things get that congested. But these types of elements are things that he's going to learn, I believe, in time, because he's already gotten a lot better at that this season, to do it less and less and less. And he's been scanning a lot more actively as well, with the puck on a stick as well as without, in terms of being aware of his surroundings. And while that has more often than not applied to his opponents more than his teammates, that this is something that I think has a lot of room to grow, certainly, but I also don't really have too many concerns of there being progression on that front in the coming seasons. He's also a player who's an April 6th, 07 birthday, so pretty average age here for the draft class, not on the older or the younger side, pretty much right in the middle. But overall, he's a guy that I think, despite that age, has a lot of runway because of that physical profile. He still has so much physical maturity to gain in terms of growing fully into his frame. And players who can add to their games in terms of both the physical element and the mental element through the seasons after their draft years are often the ones who see the biggest leaps in their effectiveness, in their talent level, in their ability to dominate games and take control of shifts. And these are things that I see with this Czech winger. Other habits in his game, I think, really help his projection as well, like his constant desire to keep his feet moving. He's a very active player, constant stick, trying to disrupt things defensively. The intelligence defensively still needs some work. The awareness, the scanning, right? These are elements that will come hopefully with maturity. But at the moment, he's a player that has that level of desire. He has skill on puck. He has violence on both sides of the puck. On puck as well. I mean, as a puck protector, this is a guy who can shield possession really effectively with his leg, with his arm, can push players off, force his way to the middle of the ice. These are flashes that exist more and more and more often in his game as the seasons progressed. And this is a profile I just struggle to see falling outside of the first round with how NHL teams draft. What we've seen in past years of the late risers, what kind of players end up rising up draft boards late in the season and go higher than potentially expected a couple months before the draft. It's these kinds of players that can take control of games with a combination of raw skill, but also physicality, and can dominate the middle of the ice. NHL teams are going to look at this and see a player that they can mold into a really interesting kind of power forward. And he's also pretty new on many radars. He wasn't talked about all that much as a high-end prospect up until maybe like December or maybe it was November, but it hasn't been all that long. I know I was only really starting to tune in massively into his game around the new year. It took me a while as well, and I've been covering the USHL here this season, but it took him some while to get started. But when he got going, he at his best is the best player that I've watched among all draft eligibles in the USHL this season. There's a real level of dominance there in his game, and how his physicality, creativity, and handling skill combine for special sequences is something that few other prospects in this year's draft class as a whole can match. He's a really, really interesting player that I've loved watching. He's a very fun player to watch, and I think that fans of whichever team ends up selecting him on NHL draft day are going to fall in love with him really, really quickly, even at rookie camp, because he plays the game the right way. He plays the game the way that you want your players to approach the game of hockey come playoff time. And he's been so important here in the playoff run for Muskegon, not just in terms of the scoring, and the scoring hasn't like jumped off the page necessarily, but in terms of just the little details, the shift by shift intensity. This is a guy that has a lot of those habits down, and that's something that will make a lot of NHL teams a lot less worried potentially to take a swing on him in the first round, and maybe even inside the top 22 or 23 picks on draft day. I would absolutely love to see it. This kid deserves to get a pick that high up on draft day. But that wraps things up for the second segment. In the next one, we'll be focusing on what's ahead for this player, what his range is on draft day, which NHL players play like him, and which NHL teams will be the best landing spots for a player like this. All that and a lot more coming up after these messages from our sponsors at Locked On NHL Prospects. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you up to 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keeping you feel fueled for longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety. It's the perfect grab and go snack for my busy days. Whether I'm snacking at my desk or on a road trip or just need a quick protein boost, they are always my go-to. And if you love cracking open every single shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to get started. Alrighty, let's wrap up the show here in the final segment, kicking it off with where this player just might go on draft day. And as I mentioned in earlier parts of the episode, I think he's going to go higher than he's currently projected to go by most outlets. Again, he's mostly ranked in that 26 to 55 or 60 range. So mostly held in the second round range right now in rankings. Only 2 rankings have him in the first. I'd be pretty surprised if he's available on day 2 of the draft. This is a player that NHL teams love to take swings on, especially if you're a contending team that is thinking about the playoffs, was just involved in a long playoff race. You want to bring players into your lineup, even at the draft, who will complement that style of play. And I think that Nestrašil is exactly the kind of player that will elevate teams when they need it most. Therefore, I think that the 20 to 35 range is probably where he's going to fall come draft day. You're going to see a lot of those contending teams or those like fringe playoff teams really looking hard at a player like this. He could even go as high as like 16th or 17th overall. I wouldn't be shocked to see a team like the Montreal Canadiens take a swing on a player like this. They love their toolsy players with a lot of runway developmentally, who play the game the right way with physicality and intensity and desire and grit. And they have 2 picks right there back to back in that range, unless they're able to upset the Washington Capitals and move higher up in the draft ranking over the coming weeks. But most likely are going to get at least obviously the 1 pick at 16th overall with the Calgary Flames, unless they trade that as well. As for where he might fall on draft day, the 3 teams I've outlined as the most likely candidates, starting off with the Ottawa Senators, who always love their big physical players, especially higher up on draft day. We saw it last year with Gabriel Eliasson. We've seen it with Tyler Clevin. We've seen it with Tyler Boucher. A lot of players that go high for the Ottawa Senators on draft day bring a lot of physicality to the mix. And I think a really interesting part of going for a guy like Nestrašil at the draft is that he brings so much skill as well. The soft skill, the deftness, the creativity, the ability to create just wonderful sequences that get fans out of their seats. He brings that element as well. And I think that the Sens could really use more of that in their prospect pool. And I think we're seeing that as well in this series against the Toronto Maple Leafs, where you're getting stellar goaltending from Linus Ullmark in goal, but you just need to put the puck in the back of the net a bit more consistently and perhaps have a little bit more net front presence beyond just Ridley Gregg and Brady Tkachuk. So Nestrašil would certainly bring those elements to the table, and I think that Sens fans would absolutely adore the way that this player plays the game. The Nashville Predators are another option, and they have 2 picks kind of in this range with Tampa Bay's and Vegas's picks. So we'll see where this specifically end up with how the playoffs shake out in the end. But either of those, I think, are more than fair spots for Nestrašil to land. And Nashville's a great landing spot, in my opinion. This is a team with a lot of depth in their prospect pool who can still use a little bit more of that power forward style going forward. There's a lot of ability in a player like Nestrašil, and I think that Nashville's a landing spot where he'd be surrounded with a lot of supportive talent that would complement his game really, really nicely down the road. Last but not least, in terms of NHL team fits, I also think that the Washington Capitals would be an interesting one. Currently, they have the 31st overall pick based on Tankathon, but we'll see if they make it all the way to the finals. Of course, they had a little bit of trouble with the Habs here in Game 3 and barely won in Game 1. But overall, I think that Washington's a team that we've seen loving their big power forwards over the years, right? Whether it's the Tom Wilsons, whether it's going for big guys at the draft like Ivan Miroshnichenko, or going for just more physical bulldogs of players like Ryan Leonard. That physical element is something really important for this team on the wing. I'm not sure if they're going to be targeting a wing specifically at the draft this season, but around 31st overall, if Nestrašil's on the board, I don't think there are many players with significant like second line upside left available at that stage who have like really like direct paths in terms of reaching that potential. There's a lot of players that have very theoretical upside at that level. I think guys like in my region in the USA, like LJ Mooney and Adam Banak, who are really skilled, intelligent, shifty players, but that inside driven mentality, the consistency in supporting playmaking incursions with scanning and awareness, those are still real works in progress. So these are players that could just end up as AHL scorers at the end of the day, or if they make everything work and put everything together in just the right way, could make it work in an NHL top 6. Nestrašil does not require that kind of theoretical projection in terms of seeing him in a role in the NHL. There's so much that he does that I think is going to make that path easier for him to get to at the National Hockey League level. And the Washington Capitals, I think, would really, really love a player that can bring that late in the first round. But what is the overall upside with Nestrašil? I think he's a player that could really reach a height of a second-line power forward who plays with grit and violent intensity, and who can also just completely dissect a defensive structure with his high-end handling, his creativity, and using his surroundings to his advantage. This is a guy that at his peak could turn into, think, a hybrid of like Oliver Bjorkstrand and Alex Tuch. I don't think he's going to be as good of a goal scorer as Alex Tuch, but that playmaking creativity, the deftness, the mobility could be a bit Bjorkstrand-like, but perhaps a little bit more middle-driven like it is with Tuch. Another comparison in terms of the floor with Nestrašil, which I think is probably that of a fourth-line checking winger, guy who can bring a lot of intensity, some depth scoring, who can fill in on the PK or on the power play wherever you need him, who's very versatile in playing up the lineup, but plays his day-to-day on the fourth line. Sounds a lot like a Yoel Armia style of player to me, who's also a first-round draft pick around a similar range. I think 16th overall. He went to the Buffalo Sabres over a decade ago. And he's a player that has always had a lot of skill as well in his game in terms of the handling, the heavy shot, and just not fully coming together in a top six capacity at the National Hockey League level, but him adapting his game to being a PK specialist, a hardworking player. He was even sent down to the AHL a little bit a year and a half ago and just rebounded really, really well with the Montreal Canadiens to be a consistent and reliable piece down the lineup who can fill in, can get you at least 10 goals a season, can threaten 25 points as well, and overall just can elevate the players around him and make their lives a bit easier. I think Nestrašil has that in his game with a bit more violence as well. So that's kind of the range of possible outcomes I see if he's able to crack the NHL, which I'm very confident he's going to be able to do. But I would love to hear from your insights down below as well in the comments. If you've watched this player play, what have your impressions been? What have your takeaways been? Like, what is the most fun aspect of his game, and where do you see him settling in an NHL lineup at the end of the day? Is he a third liner, a second liner? Does he even have complementary top line upside? I'd love to hear from your opinions down below. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please do make sure to make us your first listen of the day. We always appreciate our everydayers. And for your second listen of the day, you can head on over to Locked On Fantasy Hockey, where Flip and Steel break down everything you possibly could want to know to build yourself a sustainable and competitive fantasy roster. But that wraps it up here for us today. I'm your host, Sebastian High. Thank you so much for listening as always, and I hope you catch you tuning in again very, very soon.